just go home. So I'm sorry if it's going to take long. But this particular scripture has been in my heart for a couple of years, and it's from 2 Samuel. So if you can open your Bibles to 2 Samuel. Verse 11. So it's a combination of 2 Samuel 11 and chapter 11 and chapter 12. It's a story of David about when we talk about David's life, we talk about in terms of how he defeated Goliath. He had all these great moments, but I was reading into the story and I was looking at David. He was a young shepherd. He gained his popularity. He was a musician. He did a lot of great things at the time. But that's what we know David as, right? We know David as somebody who's great. He defeated a giant. That's a good thing. That's what every Christian sermon is about. Yeah, you got to defeat your Goliath in life, things like that. But I was focusing more on the side of David's downfall, which not really a lot of people focused on, which is what I thought I would start looking at today. So that's why I chose this chapter of 2 Samuel 11 and 12, and I wish we had the time to read the entire thing, but I thought I'll give you like a whole summary of it. Is that David was in his palace and he gone through his kingship, and so he's right now a king. He's ruling over everybody and stuff like that. But at the same time, he one day is on his palace and he looks out through the window and sees Bathsheba taking a shower, and that's when something comes over his heart. Now you got to keep in mind, David was a person who God said was God deemed David as somebody after God's own heart, right? And after all of those things, after all of those victory, you would think that David would be somebody who is in line with God, or who is the best person to be after God, or is somebody who is going to do all the right things. But in that one moment of weakness, David looked after Bathsheba, started lusting after her, and everything after that started becoming a downfall for him. And that's what I was focusing on was once David started lusting after Bathsheba, he called her into his palace and he slept with her, and I was looking more into it. And those days, David being the king, there was not a lot of things Bathsheba could have said against whatever David wanted to happen, but Bathsheba was married to this guy called Uriah, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Uriah. And Uriah was David's most trusted, I would say, a general, a secretary, or he was a person in the higher standing. And he was David's loyal friend, probably the only friend at the time. And Uriah was at a war at the time. So David was lusting after Bathsheba. He slept with her, and then Bathsheba comes back, and David finds out that Bathsheba is pregnant. So you can see from just one point, from just one lust, of how everything started going downhill for David. And it was just kind of crazy, because there are a lot of times when we it doesn't necessarily have to be a loss for everybody, but we go after one thing after the other, and then we try pursuing those things, and those things may not even be in line with what God has in store for us, and then everything starts going downhill after that, and we try our best to keep going at it, to keep fighting for it, when the only thing that it's going to do is cause us more harm. So and that's what when you read chapter 11 and 12, you will start seeing that David slept with Bathsheba and she got pregnant. But to cover up the story of the fact that David slept with her, um, he calls Uriah back, and Uriah comes back graciously because Uriah was a loyal friend to David. But he starts setting up instances where Uriah can sleep with his own wife, so that it wouldn't look like David was the one who conceived, not conceived, who slept with Bathsheba and Bathsheba conceived David's child, but it will look like Uriah was the one who was the father of the child. But the thing about Uriah was a very loyal friend. He never went against the laws that was set at the time. So at the time when back in those days, when somebody was sent to military war, they were not supposed to come back and have any sexual activity, and if they did, it was against the law, which means they would have to go through certain rituals to clean themselves up, and they would not be able to enter into the military duty. So at the time when David called Uriah, uh, David told Uriah to just go and sleep with his wife, enjoy the time off, have a good time with your wife. But Uriah slept outside David's door, not seeing his wife. And then David tried to cover up. And when David found out that Uriah did the same, slept outside his door, David was like, "Hey, why don't you go to your wife? I called you back so that you can enjoy time with your wife." But Uriah said, "It's." I'm saying all this from the stories. It's not my own story. But Uriah said about how that there are people fighting in the war, and here I am being the commander, and I'm just sleeping over here. That doesn't seem right. That doesn't sit well with me. But then David tried covering that up by making Uriah drunk, and then when Uriah got drunk, he just went and slept with David's servant. So David tried doing a lot of things to cover up his own mistake that he first created in the first place. And again, I want to emphasize on the fact that God called David. God said that David was somebody who was after my own heart. That's like, to me, that's like the top of the sentences God can say about somebody else, somebody who we love, right? Like, if God told me, "Rohin, you're somebody after my own heart," and I was like, man, that's really good to hear. David was somebody who God kept racing through his life, through different battles in life, through different stages, and he reached the level where he became a king in his life. But at the same time, somewhere along the track, he lost focus of God, and he started focusing on himself, and everything after that went downhill. He tried covering up everything that he sinned for. Instead of going to God and saying, "Hey God, I'm sorry that I did this. I need a way out of this," he just tried covering up everything. So after that, Uriah was sleeping with right next to David's servants, but David was not happy with that either. So David decided to kill Uriah, right? And at that point, David gave a letter to Uriah where it was Uriah's own death certificate. And David told Uriah to go and give it to the general where he was going to go in war with. And that would be like me asking Matt to just take a death certificate and give it to somebody he trusts. And he doesn't even know about the fact that it's a death certificate that he's carrying in his hand. But David knew that Uriah was such a loyal friend that he wouldn't even open up that letter. And that's exactly what happened. He went to the war, and then he got killed in that war. But I was really reading it, and I was really engrossed into it, because you could see David's downfall from there, from the first time he saw the lusting up until the end of the moment. And even after that, he just did not realize that he was going downhill, just it just kept going. He just started covering it up, and it was just a sad moment. But the thing that I love about God, or the reason why, when I was sitting over here hearing everybody's testimonies, that the grace of God is so much more bigger, so much more greater than anything else that we can encounter, right? So the whole of chapter 11 was when David did all these things, but the chapter 12 starts with, and God sent Nathan. And man, I got so excited about that fact that God sent Nathan. Like, who is Nathan? I have no idea. But in Bible, God doesn't say a lot about Nathan. Nathan was a prophet. David went to Nathan in terms of any kind of prayers and stuff like that. But God sent Nathan, and that really spoke to me, because how many Nathans do we have in our lives over here in this room? How many times have God sent Nathans to us? Our testimonies show it a lot. God sent Nathans in all the moments in our life when we were feeling depressed, when we were sad, when we were lonely, when we just couldn't see another day. There was always a Nathan in our life that was willing to go out of their ways to help us. And that's exactly what God was doing with David's life as well. So so there's two portions in 2 Samuel 12 that I really liked. Was when in 2 Samuel chapter 12 verse 1 was when the Lord sent Nathan to David. And then Nathan goes on explaining about the story about the poor man and the rich man and stuff like that, and then David gets really angry at the story, but more of what the story was outlined for. But here's verse 7 when Nathan said to David, "You are the man, thus says the Lord and the God of Israel. I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you out of the hands of Saul. I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your arms, and gave you the house of Israel of Judah. And if this were too little, I would add you as much more. Why have you despised the word of the Lord to do this evil in the sight? You have struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and have taken his wife to be your wife, and have killed him and with the sword of the Ammonites. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from your house, because you have despised me, and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up evil against you out of your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes, and give them to your neighbor. And he shall lie with your wife and in the sight of the sun, for you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun." And if you look at that chapter, or whatever I read from chapter 12, was 7 to 12, you can see about how God is sending Nathan to David and saying, "I'm going to do all these things to you. You sinned against me. You deserve punishment. You don't deserve to live in the first place. I called you my son. I said that you are a man after my own heart, but you did the one thing that I told you not to do, and because of that, you're going to suffer all these things." But in verse 13, you can see David said to Nathan, "I have sinned against the Lord." And Nathan said to David, The Lord also has put away your sin. You shall not die." And that's what my whole focus was. The amount of time God has sent Nathan in our lives is just incredible. No matter what we do, the grace that God shows us. Old Testament was a period where grace was not the best used, or people would say that God was not gracious enough, God was an angry God. But when I was reading this, I was like, man, David's punishment was death. And God said, if you break my commandments, you're just gonna die. But but to give amount of grace that David was showing was just incredible, and that's what and that's what was that's where I was reaching out to, was the fact that God sent Nathan to each and every one of us, so that in our moment of sad times, in our moment of depression, in our moment of anxiety, we know that God is still there through it all. You know, we may think like we can feel like there's no tomorrow, and I've been there personally too. But I know that because Jesus came down, He became the Nathan in our lives, so that we can look to Him and say thank you for bringing us to this new year and listening to my sermon in 2020. Happy New Year, guys.